Hello and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. I am thrilled to be here with my co-host Jamie as we're going to do an episode today that I've been long looking forward to doing. And I think you will be excited to hear about it. So we're going to talk about stress and adrenals. And this is a big topic. And like I've mentioned before and others, sometimes I feel overwhelmed by certain things. And so what's stressing me out today is talking about adrenals. Because it's one of those areas in health that in conventional medicine, we don't really get a lot or any kind of background or training in how to address. And there's a whole world of functional and integrative medicine that, definitely addresses it better. But we really want to address this for women today, especially, and men, but women in particular are unique, and we know this. And women hold stress in a unique way. And so it affects us very differently and individually as women. So we want to talk about how you can take steps to see this issue in your life, to take changes that may help your stress and adrenals, and to really improve your daily quality of life.
Totally. Yeah, let's start off, Teresa. I'm excited for this too. And I always think about how you say hormones are cool, but they're complicated. And so true in this category as well, right? So we'll be talking about the hormones produced by the adrenals. But what I want to do first, before we even talk about that, is some of you who may be listening, may be thinking, okay, what are the adrenals again? Like, where are they located? What kind of hormones do they produce? All the things. So just to get us started, I always tell people, okay, if you know where your kidneys are, just go to the lower portion of your back, right above your booty. I would say, take your two fists, put them right here, rest them in those, like that dimple part right above your tootsie. And then your adrenals are right above your kidneys. So they're like, acorn shaped. They're kind of like triangular in size. They rest right above the kidneys there. And so typically when we talk about adrenals, or if you hear about adrenals, you hear about adrenal fatigue and all of that. It's because, and we're going to dig into this more, but just for the context, when we get stressed, we produce hormones that create like fight or flight in us, and it keeps us alive and surviving and all those things. But sometimes it gets overworked. And so again, when you think of adrenals from here on out, just know what people are really referring to. One of the things are like that cortisol response and that survival fight or flight, when your heart starts to race and all the things. So we're going to dig into that today. Teresa and we're going to talk about the function of our adrenals and then ways to kind of help the function of your adrenals and how that, again, affects even the charting patterns that we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, so adrenals on the top of the kidneys. I've had a kidney stone. I know exactly where that feels. And again, the endocrine system, you could say, is the symphony of hormones. Mm-hmm. And I like to tell my patients that, they're all incredibly important. In fact, they're all imperative in terms of their function. But the adrenals in particular are our survival hormone. So if they are out of balance, they tend to steal away from other things for the sake of survival. So if you think of a human being and what its needs are, survival is first. And your adrenals produce two types of hormones. They produce steroid hormones, which eventually become more of our reproductive hormones. And they also produce glucocorticoid hormones, which are the control of blood sugar and blood pressure. So there's two types of hormones and there's zones, and it's a very complicated small organ. And here's the deal. Adrenal fatigue, this word, it may make people in conventional medicine uncomfortable, because they're like, what does that mean? I mean, your adrenals, in a sense, don't run out of hormone. So you can't really, stop that. And if that happens, you actually have an actual adrenal disease called Addison's. And that's, something that we won't talk about today. But adrenal fatigue is a lesser, but more, even an important issue that has to deal with more the relationship between the hypothalamus and the organ, the adrenals. So in medicine, we call this the HPA Axis. So when your body perceives stress, whether it be, an actual thing where maybe you're being robbed, or you just had someone walk in on you in your workplace and criticize or yell at you for doing something, your body is going to release something that's going to make you feel quickly not well, right? Anxious, your heart rate's going to go up, but your body does that so you can run away from the problem in a sense and have the energy to do that. Here's the problem though. We live in a hyper stressed world where that triggering between the HPA axis and your adrenals can almost happen constantly. And if that occurs where you're constantly producing too much cortisol or too much adrenaline, I mean, imagine you're constantly running from the bear. And not only that, then over a period of time, it's almost like that communication pathway between your pituitary, that HPA axis, and your adrenals is not working well together. So you could be over perceiving stress in a sense, where like, something littler happens, but your body goes into a full-blown reaction to it. Mm-hmm. And I think women know what I'm talking about. It's like maybe some little stress occurs with your children, and all of a sudden your heart rate goes up and you feel anxious and you've got a pit in your stomach and you're like, why do I feel like I need to run from something? And that's because you have now kind of a hyperactive, you could say, or dysfunction in that communication system between you and the release of these survival hormones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so even too, I remember when I was young, there would be these commercials on TV, and not even young, just like within the last 10 years, where there's, there's an outline of a person, and then there's, fat, adipose tissue, and it's just really just congregating toward the middle there. And it's like, if your cortisol is high, it's very difficult to lose weight. And so bringing some sense to that as well, in terms of survival, if you're struggling with weight and you're having a hard time, again, with this problem, ask yourself how stressed you are. If you're running from that bear, for instance, your blood, like your heart is pumping and your brain is moving 1,000,000 miles a minute. And so that the blood is circulating to the organs where you need to survive the most, but you also need to retain fat so that you can survive. And so it's really, again, this beautiful storyline of survival. But like Teresa said, it can get triggered very quickly. And because we live in more of a sedentary world, that's also part of it, is because maybe, we're really out camping and there really is a bear and we are, running away for our survival. And that same response, like Teresa said, can happen while we're sedentary. After we read an email or a text message we don't like, something that triggers us can cause that same response. Our heart starts to beat so fast, race, our armpits start to sweat, our brain starts running 1,000,000 miles a minute, like I said. And so there's a huge difference between actually running and sitting down and just feeling anxious. And so again, when I even think about weight, that's a question we get a lot, gosh, I'm having a hard time getting rid of this weight. There could be a million reasons why, but that could be one. Are you totally stressed? Are you stressed? And are you taking time to just take some deep breaths and unwind?
Yeah,
do you see that a lot, Teresa?
I see it a ton. And it happens so often past 30, 35, as our bodies just uniquely change with hormones and perimenopause too. But I'll tell you a story, just to kind of highlight what you're saying, Jamie. I had a patient one time who was a very accomplished ballerina, and she went through a trauma. And the trauma had to do with a very terrible work situation where she was bullied on a daily basis. And then on top of that, she had a trauma that occurred also in her family. Within a year of that particular crazy amount of stress that she went through, her body completely changed. She gained upwards of 60 pounds in a year past that point. And she became completely exhausted. The type of exhaustion where you can't even pick up your 2 feet to take a walk for the day. And so when we think about adrenals, we want to think about, obviously there's chronic stress and there's family stress, but when you have an acute trauma that occurs, and then a year or two later, you're looking at your health and you're thinking, what happened? Ask yourself what happened a couple years back. Right. And, one thing I read about recently was there was a study done in the 1990s called the Adverse Childhood Outcome Study. And it basically took a large population of adults and asked them questions about their childhood. And it had them rate or score how many traumatic events had occurred in their life. That be death, a parent with alcoholism, divorce, sexual abuse, just a variety of different traumatic experiences. And I can't remember what the rating went up to, but if you had a score greater than 4 on that study, the likelihood that you would have diabetes, cancer, heart disease, mental health issues, pretty much all of the big things that we have to deal with in terms of chronic disease went up dramatically. Mm-hmm. And so what we have to realize, and you mentioned this, Jamie, I think before we even started talking here today, is that our bodies have a memory for stress, a very, very strong memory. It's almost like our adrenals don't know time. Mm-hmm. All they know is that something happened possibly in our past that made us feel like we were going to not make it in this world. And so it constantly is like, wait, do we need to go into survival to make sure that we're going to make it? Mm-hmm. And so there's a really great Dr. Marcelle Pick, and if you want to learn more about adrenals, I think she's great. But I'm going to use her line that she says often, and it's, if you don't own your story, or if you don't deal with your story will own you. Mm. And so whatever it is that you've had in your life, and we've all got something, and obviously some people have big things. Mm-hmm. If you haven't dealt with that, then the likelihood is that that's going to affect you in your health long term. And it doesn't mean you have to do 20 years of therapy now, but you do need to just go back to those points. One, just recognize them. And then ask yourself, did I fully grieve, process, forgive, heal from whatever it was that happened in my life?
It makes me think of a story a friend of mine was sharing of this child who, at the age of 7, they just started acting so strangely. And it was because later on they found out that when this child was young, they were like suffocated, like it might have been like shaken baby sort of thing, or like the baby wasn't, was crying too much, so the mom put a pillow over the baby's face, something like that. Okay. And so then this young child grows up, and then it comes to find out, like again at around age 7, that the mom had done that when that child was a baby. It was just then that the child started acting out. And the reason the friend told me that is because the power of processing or even talking about something was so powerful. He was saying that after this little boy and a therapist just talked about it, even though the kid was a baby, his behavior just disappeared. Like he processed it. Even you would assume. So even for those of you listening, the reason I'm bringing this up is because if there's something that happened to you at a young age, and again, there might be things that you don't even know that happen like at a young age, but if there are things you do know, don't push it off. I mean, I guess the one thing I would say, I hope people take from this episode, especially like the women listening, like many of you likely have had very heartbreaking losses, potentially of miscarriage, or of your children, of your parents, of family members, whatever the thing, or again, sexual abuse of some kind. And it may seem easier, better. And again, I can't speak 100% from experience with those things. Miscarriage, I can. But it might seem easier just to kind of say, well, next year I'll work through that. But the sooner you do it, and again, the more thorough you can get through, it might not take as long as you think. Just like that little boy, again, he was only 7. He didn't live as many years as we've lived, but just talking about it literally relieved him. There's something so mysterious and magical about processing our memories. I think sometimes we think it's like so laborious, and it can be hard. But it may be a little easier than what we might think, in just that we recall it and we process it. And so again, if you sense that you trigger, like you get, like you catch your breath and you get stiff and you get anxious about a random thing, and you think, oh, it's not just your personality, that there's probably a story prior to that. So start paying attention. How do I feel when I start getting anxious? And normal people in my mind wouldn't necessarily react in that way. There's probably a story there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so great. Okay, so we've talked about now this emotional connection, really this spiritual connection to your adrenals.
Yeah.
And what I want people to go away with here is, yes, you can go to a doctor and definitely have your blood tested and your hormones tested, but these things that we're going to talk about today, I mean, really they affect everyone, and everybody can take steps to help their adrenal health. And so number one, we've talked about dealing with your story and helping to get back to what has affected you in your life, and asking those deep questions and taking steps to heal. So the next thing I want to talk about, Jamie, is just, what other things that we might see in someone who has adrenal issues. And really, and I don't know how you look at it, but I look at it almost in dividing into two categories. There's probably more than that, but I'm just going to keep it simple. There is someone that's had such acute stress over a period of time that they literally get to the point where they're in an adrenal kind of exhaustion. And I think that's why we use this term called adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
And it causes a variety of symptoms. But I think the easiest way to kind of say what it is that you just feel exhausted all the time. Mm-hmm. And at that point, your body, your brain, everything is just not working, and you're probably gaining weight, and your blood sugars are not working for you. Your blood pressure, when you get up, you might feel lightheaded. You might, again, all those things that the adrenals kind of control is not working in balance, and you're just exhausted. And then you have a different type of adrenal issue where it's kind of like a wired, anxious feeling. You might feel tired at times in that too, but it's more like it's a revved up thing where you've really are just spurting out kind of cortisol throughout the day. And so you want to know that your cortisol is highest in the morning, and it's supposed to just naturally kind of calmly decrease throughout the day till you get to your bedtime and you can go to sleep. That's called a circadian rhythm. Mm-hmm. But many people with these stresses are not doing that. They're basically running higher cortisol. Those are the people that are the anxious and wired throughout the day, instead of nicely, slowly climbing down. Or if they're feeling that total exhaustion, they may kind of really never get up to a nice, normal high level in the morning, and they're kind of flatline throughout the day. Mm-hmm. And so there ain't no adrenaline. There's just like, I can barely move. So that's how I look at kind of the two types of adrenal, kind of more apparent issues there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with the adrenal fatigue, or the first example you used, it makes sense, because if we're in chronic stress, it makes sense that our adrenals would get tired from that. And then, again, in terms of that fatigue, whereas if you're constantly that wired type, and if that isn't remedied, you can get to the adrenal fatigue part where you're very, very, very tired. So in my mind, it seems as though it goes through a stage. You're constantly wired, and then you're not responding to that stimuli or whatever might be causing that. And then it makes you super tired. I want to talk, Teresa, about how that affects our chart, like our charting. So for those of you listening, you might be thinking, this is all really well and good and great, but I don't have that problem. Or maybe you think I'm kind of hyper, but I don't know if it's affecting my fertility much. I know for me, my temperament, I know for years, like I probably missed 10 days of running in like between the ages of like 14 and 24 in 10 years. But I know that I needed that, and I still do. I need that energy release. Otherwise, just my temperament is hyper, so some of you guys just might be more hyper, and you just need to like run or exert some energy, get that energy out of you, if that relates to you. But anyway, in terms of charting, let's dig into that a little bit more. So we know, like Teresa mentioned at the very beginning, and as we discussed further, in order to survive our heart and our brain, those are the things that we need the blood, okay? But like our secondary functions, like digestion, like ovulating, those sorts of things, those are not prioritized for survival. Like if you're running from a bear, your body doesn't want to just have like sex in the woods quick with some hunter. You're not like, oh, there's a hunter. Okay. Like, no, you're like survival. Oh, heavens. So when you're thinking about that, like your body doesn't want that. So in terms of your charting, likely you will see that if you are so stressed, you might not be ovulating at all. Because again, your body is not prioritizing that function.
Right.
So Teresa, I'm sure you've worked with plenty. I know I've worked with plenty of women who are just so frustrated. They're not able to achieve pregnancy. They don't know why they're not ovulating, or maybe they are, but it's a sluggish ovulation. Maybe we could just dig into that too, for those of our listeners wondering about that.
Yeah, I mean, so the most common thing we kind of see is just an acute stress causing a change. So, one common one is like the female athlete.
Yeah.
So college, and this has happened to me. I don't know if it's happened to you, Jamie, but like you're training so heavily and maybe you're not getting hydrated and eating the right nutrients and you start skipping your periods. And that's exactly like you said, Jamie. It's just your body's saying, we've got to focus on survival. This person is obviously running from some sort of large animal. So, so that's the female athlete. We see it sometimes with just acute traumas, like a death in the family. Weddings. I often bring up weddings. We work with couples, Jamie, that are getting engaged and they're excited for the wedding. They're going to ask me, so what happens if I fall on my period when I'm, on my honeymoon, or if I'm on my ovulation? And I'm looking at them like, well, it's not likely to be what you think, because it's likely that wherever your cycle is now, it's probably going to be off. Because weddings are super stressful. And so women tend to ovulate later, and that becomes delayed in their cycle. So that's a good tip for anybody getting married. But then, like you said, Jamie, there's sometimes this kind of overall chronic stress. And I hate to say it, but that is kind of where when couples struggle with infertility, you'll have people say things like, well, if you just weren't so stressed, maybe it would happen. And it's not the right thing to say ever, but there is truth in the fact of what we're saying here today, which is that your body will prioritize survival over reproduction. Yep. So there is truth to that. So you got to take a hard look at that if you're in that situation, and do whatever you can. And in the chart, a lot of times what we'll see is decreased mucus. This can happen in a one cycle situation. I've seen this, or it can happen chronically, where your mucus decreases. And that, again, it's probably the hormones changing, but it's also your body kind of prioritizing, not to reproduce. So we see this decreased mucus. So if you are charting and all of a sudden you start a heavy exercise program because you're like, I'm going to get fit and I'm going to lose weight, and all of a sudden you have no mucus, it is very possible it is because of the change that you made in your lifestyle. I know that seems crazy, but we see that in charting. And if you're trying to achieve pregnancy, that may be kind of a hurdle to get over then.
Yeah, totally. I remember in track silently feeling so ashamed that I still had my period when the athletes weren't getting theirs. And I thought to myself, oh my word, they are working harder than I am. And so they don't have their period, but I still do. So I must not be working hard enough. I remember vividly. I remember having that thought and feeling so ashamed, hiding my tampons. Like, how messed up.
Anyway. That's crazy, Jamie. And that's a good point. I mean, you were in a situation where, your body was compensating well, and that's individual, right? Some people, it would take very little exercise and their body might skip their period. And another person would have to run a marathon to do that. So for every person, this may be different. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, that's never happened to me, and I had a terrible, terrible stress and I didn't skip my period. Oh, that's okay. Yeah. It's individual to the person. But your hormones are important. So if you're skipping your period and it's going on for more than 3 cycles, you need to get help for that, because your hormones protect your heart, protect your bones, and protect your brain. You just always need to remember those 3 things kind of it. And so you need to get help for that.
Amen. Amen. Something else too, with your charting pattern, women, you will likely set, and I think, Teresa, you just said this a little bit, but in terms of preparing for a wedding or just anything, an exam you're taking, you're moving, anything like that that's causing stress, what's happening is your body is wanting to protect that egg. So if you're stressed, it's the body's form of survival. And so it will, for some women, like Teresa said, it depends on the woman, but it is a form of survival, in that once the stress has been released or relieved, then likely you'll ovulate. So it's cool. Yeah. So it's neat to see. And so if you're charting your cycle, you just ask yourself during that time where you think you're ovulating, am I under any unusual stress this cycle? If the answer is yes, then you expect that likely that might not have been ovulation, and that you wait for ovulation later. And that, again, is answered because you'll see another mucus pattern that indicates ovulation. So anyway, just as a the little key for those of you that are charting. That's what you'd look for.
Yeah, we call that the double peak in
Double peak.
Creighton model. But I'm sure other systems, use a very similar kind of protocol. When you're under stress, ask the question, am I under stress? And imagine that, wait, could that be holding up my egg out from getting out the gate? And to remember, you need to pay more attention to a double mucus or a second mucus patch and a possible delayed peak or actual ovulation happening later when the stress is relieved, like Jamie just said.
Right.
Okay. I want to move on, Jamie. There's just so much to talk about, but this is a unique situation right now, and we're coming out of a pandemic. And so the stress on women and men has been particularly hard, but for women, again, because they tend to be able to multitask, I think they carry sometimes the stress of things a little bit differently. And I think adrenals are probably more of a concern. I'm not saying I work with women mostly. But I think for women, because of our multitasking nature, we tend to take on so much, and then add the pandemic in, and you're homeschooling your kids, and you can't get your kids outside and play with the neighbors, and all of these extra stresses. And it made me think about, I was on an airplane recently, and you know how like in the airplane, they always say when, you're going to fall out of the sky, you need to have your life raft. And I'm always thinking to myself, there's no water underneath me. Like there's going to be no water. Why do I need a life vest? Anyway, and then they always talk about the oxygen mask that comes down right out of the little thing up above your head. And what do they say? They say, make sure you fit your oxygen mask on you first before you put it on your child or someone next to you that needs your help. And that just makes me think this is so true of women, right? We tend to like deprive ourselves of all oxygen. And then we're like, why can I not breathe? I'm drowning, And what we should be doing is putting the oxygen mask on us first so we can actually care properly for the beloved people around us that we do on a daily basis. I just think that's such a perfect way to explain how women, kind of are. So what are the things then what we need to do, Jamie, in terms of we talked about dealing with the trauma and the stress, but from a lifestyle perspective, there are certainly things women can do to help their stress and adrenals.
I'd say the first things first is to know thyself. So take an inventory, ask yourself, take a minute, even now, push pause if you need to on this podcast, and just ask yourself, my neighbor, my sister, my cousin, they might need this thing, but I need this. For instance, for me, what I need to be around others, which sounds interesting to other people that might be extremely stressful. But for me, I feel very alive and healthy when I'm with other people, like friends, socially. But again, that might be someone else's nightmare in terms of trying to recoup. So take inventory. Everyone is so different. You're gonna know what you need, especially maybe you don't know right in this moment, but take note, what is it that you need? There's an example of a story. I was meeting with a gal for a hormone consult, and she was completely stressed out. She was not ovulating. They wanted to achieve pregnancy. I think they had maybe 6 kids there. She was so stressed, but she wanted a baby, and just, it was all coming together. And I said, well, what do you love to do? What's the one thing where if you could just choose one day of just doing it? She's like, I love to crochet. I said, oh my gosh, so cool. She's like, yeah, I love it. Went on and on. I said, when was the last time you crocheted? She's like, 10 years ago. I'm like, oh my word. I'm like, I could talk to you about oils and supplements all day long, but you go get those crocheting needles, and your assignment before we talk next, literally is the first thing you have to do. Find a time to crochet. And so I legit would text her and be like, have you crocheted? Send me a picture. I mean, something just as simple as that. Women, if we are stressed and we're like in a fog, we can hardly see through it. Sometimes we just need someone close to us to say, go ahead and do that, please. Find somebody, a steward, a guardian, your husband, your mother, someone, just to say, will you keep me accountable to this? My goal is that I walk a couple times a week, or I listen to a podcast, or whatever. So main point, in terms of tips, Teresa, I think we take inventory on what we love that always will fill us, and start there.
Yeah, that's great. And that goes to maybe another point would be exercise, because you kind of mentioned movement in that. Exercise can be a blessing, obviously. When people overdo it because they're stressed out, that can work against them. So remember, it's always a balance and it's individual for each person. But exercise can help release some of that energy and help us to decompress from the stress in our lives. So just make sure whatever it is that you're doing isn't this, I got to do it every day and I got to do it for 3 hours, or somehow I'm not going to, meet my goals, or I'm going to get heavy if I don't do this amount of exercise. That's the wrong way to exercise. It should be, this is good for my body. I'm getting my heart rate up to help my heart health. And this is, making me happy, and it should be balanced in that. And then, so then nutrition, I think, and eating is always a big one, right, Jamie? And everyone's like, what's the right diet for this? For everything. I think nutrition in women is just a very complicated issue, but I think we can keep it simple because, again, nothing is going to work for everybody, guys. I mean, keto, intermittent fasting, paleo, Mediterranean, they're all good. But it's going to be individual to the person. And I wish I could, exactly tell every person what's going to work for them. But in some ways, you got to figure it out, guys. And this is why you got to know, whatever you said, Jamie, know thyself, right? This is something, you guys have the power in your hands in this one. I really believe that. This is something where you can take the steps to make your health better. So, I mean, there's really some simple principles, though, about nutrition. Get out the processed foods. Get out the sugars. And with that just means, imagine sugar always spiking your insulin, and insulin resistance being a huge detriment to your health and your adrenals. So we've got to bring down the whole carbohydrate load, only because you've got to get your insulin levels down, because we just got too much insulin in our society going on. So you want to get out the processed foods, you want to get out the sugars, you want to get out high fructose corn syrup. Those are just this very basic things. And then outside of that, you can nuance into these different nutrition pathways if you want. But most of us have a lot of work just in the processed food area.
Yeah. And just, again, even just drinking water. But something that I was listening to once, and I'm like, I don't know why I've never heard of this before necessarily. This easy thing for those of you wanting to know how to eat, start by just shopping around the perimeter of the grocery store. That's just a really easy thing. And so honestly, I try to do that just ever since hearing it. You would think I maybe had heard that before and it makes sense, but I'm like, you're right. The perimeter is where I just never connected the dots. Another tip too, for those of you listening, is this is like my all-time favorite hack of all. If you are stressed, okay, it's just have a stressful project at work, or you need to raise like $1 million for your nonprofit, or whatever is so stressful to you, it's the only thing you think about when you fall asleep. It's the only thing you think about when you wake up. You're in this mess. Here's a tip. Are you ready? Okay. So when we're stressed, it's that like survival brain. Okay. And it is nearly impossible to be creative and be in survival at the same time, because it's different parts of the brain. So literally, this sounds silly, but it works. Turn on a song that you like and sing to the song, or whistle or hum or write something creative. Even if you write on a piece of paper, and imagine blue butterflies in the forest, something creative. That was really random. That is going to help. So sometimes that's what I do. If I'm waking up in the morning, my kids are being crazy, it's before my period, I'm kind of like an intense rage monster, I'll turn on the Beach Boys. The kids know it and we dance, but it's just what I have to do. So I sing
the Beach Boys.
I freaking love the Beach Boys. You don't like the Beach?
No, not the Beach Boys.
Or Grace Kelly by Micah. That always puts me in a good mood. I love that song. You don't like the Beach Boys? Are you
Beach
crazy?
Boys? Who likes the Beach Boys?
I love. Oh my golly. What's your favorite? Wait, we just got to settle this.
Well, I mean, I would do like musicals like Wicked or Hamilton, kind of stuff, or just like American club music, just something to really like. Yeah. I mean, I love all music in general, but probably I'd put the Beach Boys down at the bottom.
Oh, Teresa, that's okay.
That's all right. We finally found something we can't agree on. So, okay. So nutrition, really important. Sleep. Sleep is so important if you are not sleeping. And I want to give you guys a tip because I just got this from I was listening to something on adrenals, but I'm holding it up here for Jamie to see. But this is Highlands. It's a homeopathic Forte. Calm Forte. It's a sleep aid, but it was mentioned as a help for kind of relieving stress and on the adrenals too. And I've been using this, and my son, who's kind of a high stress kid, has been using this. And oh my goodness, I use melatonin to sleep when I need to, but this is awesome stuff. So it's a homeopathic. It's got all sorts of homeopathic great things in it, but it helps with anxiousness, nervousness, and irritability. Calm Forte. So I've just been trying that. So that's when I know sleep is just so important. If you're not sleeping, if you can't fall asleep in within 15, 20 minutes, guys, melatonin is an easy, simple thing. Magnesium is also another thing in the adrenal kind of world. We talk about minerals and electrolytes because just like anything, you deplete in a high stress situation, so your electrolytes can get depleted. So magnesium is one that's often already a deficiency in people, and you're going to deplete even more. And there's other ones too. Potassium and sodium are really important. So some people put like sea salt, Himalayan sea salt in their water to restore electrolytes. You can do mineral electrolyte mixes. You can add magnesium to your bedtime routine. Everybody almost needs magnesium, almost like vitamin D deficiency. I love magnesium glycinate, 200 to 400 milligrams. Magnesium calms the adrenals. It helps it's basically its own adaptogen. It helps with blood pressure, prevents migraines, helps with insulin resistance. So I never feel wrong in mentioning magnesium. And again, glycinate is a gentle, really absorbable form.
That's amazing. This was jam-packed, Teresa. I feel like we really left our listeners hopefully with a lot. And again, this is only really the tip of the iceberg. But again, hopefully you realize, women, no matter your age, you could be, again, beyond charting, beyond childbearing years. It's still extremely helpful for you women. But those of you who are charting, though, do pay attention to that chart. And those of you who struggle, again, with fertility issues, like when again someone says just relax, you'll get pregnant when you stop trying, that's the thing that's triggering. And again, they might be saying this because they've heard it a million times, but honestly the truth behind it really is this idea of how do we, like, your body wanting to survive, and if you're constantly stressed. So I want to make sure I bring that home, because there's just been a few people I've talked to lately where that's the kind of the story there. Yeah. So Teresa, before we kind of wrap this one up, I have to say, for you listeners, listen, this is one of the most important things you're going to hear all day. Are you ready? Teresa has a book and you need it. lumenpress.org. The Happy Guides Girl to Being Whole, right?
Happy, I know it's a hard one. Happy Girl's Guide to Being Whole.
The Happy Girl's Guide to Being Whole. Oh my gosh, it's a beautiful cover. Teresa, tell us a little bit about this book, because everybody needs it.
Yeah. I mean, the heart of this book is, basically the mission of the podcast. And that's that, we want to empower women with that foundational education in their bodies. So this is just a simple, you could say, guidebook. You're not going to find an exhaustive amount of information on everything in it. But if you have a college student, a high school student even, that needs to know the very foundational information about her body and how it's made whole and good and beautiful and how it works, The Happy Girl's Guide to Being Whole is that book. And, we've been working on it for quite a while. Leah Jacobson from the Guiding Star Project has been helping to launch that project too. The Vitae Foundation has been a part of that project as well. So yeah, lumenpress.org is where you can find it. And, I think there's always going to be someone in your life that this book is going to be helpful for.
Amen. I cannot wait. I'm going to read it on a plane next week. I'm going to have my own copy, Teresa. I'm so pumped.
Awesome.
Okay. And then second thing we want to talk about is our course. So if you guys haven't yet checked out our course, be sure to do that. hormonegenius.com. It's $47. You're going to learn so much, and please share it with those around you. And especially those of you who are fertility care practitioners or DOs or MDs or PAs or NPs or yada, yada, like check it out. Cause again, there's toolkits you can print out. You can put it in a binder for reference, all the things. Teresa, any other anything we need to say
Yeah,
here?
I think we just need to tell people, hey, if you haven't already shared this podcast with one of your friends or loved ones, please do. Subscribe to our podcast. We would really love it if you would reach out to us, leave a review online, check out our YouTube channel. We want to grow because we know this information is vital, and you know that too. So please check us out, but share with others and click the buttons that allows us to reach more people. And yeah, thanks as always for all of your support.